Okay, so I'm happy that you guys all enjoyed that Hell of a Boss video. Hopefully you decided to continue watching my content. I mean, I used to have 63 subscribers and now I have 224. I'm growing pretty quickly. Thank you guys again. I'm not growing as quickly as I did on my Battle Cat channel, but that's okay. In this video, I want to you already saw the title actually. You know what I want to talk about. Are bad characters necessarily detrimental to stories, or is it fine for stories to have bad characters? So first, I want to define what a bad character actually is. So this can manifest in multiple forms. So I want to just talk about different general tones of stories that actually have bad characters. In a lighthearted sort of episodic series, like a normal kids cartoon or like something like Rick and Morty, Family Guy kind of thing, a bad character would be one where they just appear on the screen and they're just unfunny, or they have one bit, or they have no sort of joke material. So for an example of this, I would say like Panini from Chowder is an example of a bad character. Sometimes she's funny, but she has one gag. So if you just binge watch Chowder, you're eventually gonna get pretty bored and sick of it, because her whole shtick is that she's attracted to Chowder. Like, that's the only joke basically, and they just kind of, the only way to keep going with that shtick is to make it more and more absurd, and overall it just stops being funny after a few episodes because you already know what to expect. But for the exact opposite of that, I would say that in a serious show that's serialized, you gotta watch every single episode from episode 1 to understand what's going on, that kind of thing. I would say that a bad character would be one that fails to leave an impact on the reader or watcher of the movie, TV show, book, whatever, or one that's forgotten about by the author. A character that does not at all leave an impact, for a good example, is Puck from Berserk. Every time I see Puck from Berserk in the manga, I'm like, why is this guy even on screen? There's no reason for this guy to even exist. I don't like this guy because he doesn't leave a impact on the story. He's just kind of annoying. He's just kind of there. He's just an annoying sidekick, and it's not really funny, because the thing is that, okay, Puck is supposed to be like the lighthearted comic relief character because the story gets too dark, I suppose. But the thing is that the golden age was always super dark, and we didn't need a Puck-like character. Now, as for forgettable characters, I would probably name 2 characters. So the first character that I want to talk about is Wanda from Bojack Horseman. Now, this character was Bojack's girlfriend for a little while. She's like an owl who's in a coma or whatever, and she's like a TV exec. But other than that, I don't remember like anything at all about her. All that I really remember is that Bojack went into a relationship way too fast, and then he messed it up. That's like the entirety of all that I remember, and then we never see this character again. So we end up getting this character who ends up being really important in Bojack's life, and then she just kind of leaves, and then you forget about her completely, because basically every single other arc after this is way more memorable and interesting than the Wanda arc from Bojack Horseman. Now, for the second character that I want to talk about, I want to talk about Chiaotzu. All this little nigga does is he basically jumps on Nappa's back, blows up, and then he dies, and then he does nothing else for the rest of the series. Now, maybe in Dragon Ball he did something, but the thing is that I didn't watch Dragon Ball, and I've never ever seen a video or anything. I've seen a lot of clips of Dragon Ball, but I've never ever seen like a video or clip or something of someone explaining what Chiaotzu actually does in the story. So to me, Chiaotzu is one of the most forgettable characters because the little guy does literally nothing, and he's a sidekick. He's a little guy of another character that's completely forgotten and useless as well, and that being Tien. And I guess I could have put Tien here, but even Tien was at least cool in Dragon Ball. Like, I don't even know what Chiaotzu did in the entire story. Both of these characters are pretty bad because they're forgettable. Like, they appear and do one specific thing, but you don't remember those characters. What you remember instead is the things that they ended up spurring on. Like Chiaotzu, for example, was used to show how hopeless the situation the Z Fighters was in when they're fighting Nappa and Vegeta during the Saiyan saga. And with Wanda, it was to show that Bojack, even when he finds someone perfect, he's still gonna mess it up because he's Bojack. He's gonna mess it up in his own unique way. So that's basically all that these 2 characters did, and them as characters by themselves aren't very great. For the third category, I want to actually have a character that's bad because they're put into a situation or tone they're not at all supposed to be in. So for all of you Hell of a Boss fans that enjoyed that last video, or you Hell of a Boss haters, because there are way more haters for whatever reason than fans. But yeah, for whatever reason. I think that Blitzo perfectly encapsulates what this is, because outside of him being a really funny and memorable character when the story at least started off, and especially since we know that they can write Blitzo to be really entertaining and good and funny and all of that, as we've seen in the freaking Amazon Prime thing. Whenever we saw that Hell of a Boss is coming to Amazon Prime, we see that they can write Blitzo to be a very unique character. They can clearly easily imagine him in different situations. It's just that when they took him in the direction of that weird gay romance nonsense with Stolas and all that, it was just like, yo, this is so unfitting of the tone that his character was previously established within, and that's why it doesn't work, because Blitzo's not the kind of character that we're supposed to really feel bad for or even sympathize with. This guy's a demon who kills people, and that's been established, and his personality is of a demon who kills people, and yet we're supposed to take seriously that he's dating this royal guy Stolas and all of this. I don't exactly understand that, and I can't really take it too seriously because of the previous tone. So what makes a good character? So a good character, I think, is way more simple. It's just a character that works in the way that they're meant to work. So like SpongeBob, for example, he's meant to be funny, and he is funny. Ren and Stimpy, Ren is supposed to be the grumpy guy who gets really mad and really crazy, and Stimpy is supposed to be the stupid guy, and they're both best friends, right? And that just works because their characters are so simple. In a more complex story, let's take Invincible, for example. Omni-Man, he's supposed to be this really complex sort of like dark character where it's like he's learning about his humanity and stuff like that, and he's learning about who he is because of what he did to Earth. He's like, I really want to repent and say sorry for what I did, and it just does that really well. So that's simply all a good character really is. Or it could just be a character that adds surprising depth to where in a place that you just wouldn't expect. I would honestly say that a great character is someone like Morty. Like, given how Rick and Morty is, you wouldn't really expect Morty to be a complex character, but Morty's a really complex character, and in a lot of different scenarios, how he reacts is just not something that you would expect. The deepness and the bond that him and Rick share, his reactions to the things that he'd do for Jessica, stuff like that, you just wouldn't expect that kind of thing, and it does make you think more about Morty's psychology and his dichotomy with Rick. It's honestly just peak writing for a dumb show. It's just so good, man. The question was, is it fine for stories to have bad characters? And initially, when answering these initial 6 prompts, I said no, while explaining reasons why it's fine for stories to have bad characters. So yes, depending on the kind of story, comic or animated show, it doesn't matter. For some shows like Chowder, or like early Adventure Time, or some comics like, I don't know, an old one like Control Delete or VG Cats, stuff like that, the characters don't really matter. It's just, they're just vehicles for different jokes. Now, for something like Chowder, of course, the characters, they revolve around one main core sort of gimmick, and being able to mesh that together with the different stories. For Control Delete, that webcomic, if you guys read it, it's freaking old. It got trashed a long time ago, but I kind of like it. But anyway, its whole thing was that it'll be telling gamer jokes with the wacky gamer guy and the other people, and it didn't really matter if the characters of those were good, because in comics like Control Delete, webcomics like Control Delete, you're just supposed to like sit down, maybe read a little bit of it once a day or something, and then go about your day. You know, it's just a funny comic or whatever. You're not supposed to be thinking about the complexity of the characters and stuff like that. Or for Ren and Stimpy are not complex characters. If you throw them in like a DC comic or something like that, it just wouldn't make any sense, especially if you were to keep the exact same tone as like a good Batman comic or something like that. Because of the nature of certain shows, it kind of doesn't really matter. And with other points that I'm going to bring forth, I'm going to expand on this a little bit more. So 2, it doesn't matter if the character is minor. Now, if a character just appears for one issue of a comic, or like a single episode, or just like a chapter of a story, it doesn't really matter how well the character is written if they'll never appear again. So in that way, a bad character in that instance wouldn't really harm the story that much. You're not supposed to remember like a random clerk character in a cartoon. You're just not supposed to, unless that clerk character is the main character. 3. Story gimmicks can pull in more people than deep and well thought out characters. So here's the thing about a lot of comics. A lot of people want to make a comic that is super in-depth, complex, with cool characters that will stick with the audience forever. We all want to make comics like that, or cartoons like that, or books like that, or movies like that. But the thing that we have to all acknowledge as writers and enjoyers of comics, cartoons, whatever, is that most people are in there for surface level reasons. They're not gonna sit down and really think about the complexity of I don't know, Berserk. Even people who read Berserk, a very deep story, they're not in there. Majority of them are not in there for deep stuff. They're in there because the fighting is cool and Guts is freaking cool. They're not thinking about his psyche and stuff like that. So the thing is that, as I said, story gimmicks can pull in more people than deep, well thought out characters because of the fact that most people sit down and enjoy things for surface level enjoyment. That's why something like Sonic Adventures was more successful than Sonic Sat-M, because everybody would sit down and watch Sonic Adventures because it was a simple, funny cartoon. Where Sonic Sat-M, yeah, technically it was a better written story with deeper characters and everything like that. But the thing about Sonic Sat-M was the fact that it was deeper and that you had to think about it, and it was darker and it was sadder. And a lot of people aren't exactly up for that. They want an upbeat, silly sort of story. And I think that that's probably why a lot of us remember What's New Scooby-Doo more than Mystery Incorporated, for example. Because What's New Scooby-Doo was just a surface level simple show with simplistic versions of the Scooby-Doo characters. And Mystery Incorporated, it was technically way better, like way better, blew that shit out of the water, right? With the writing, the jokes, everything. But it was just the fact that it was a deeper show with a continuity and serialization. So that's why I say that story gimmicks can pull in more people than deep and well thought out characters for this point. And of course, I also think of something like, I don't know, the Boyfriend's webcomic. That thing was a flaming pile of garbage, right? That thing was horrible, but it was massively successful and might still be. I don't actually know. I'm gonna check real quick. Yeah, no, it still is massively successful. It's a thing that's existed for years, and the entire gimmick of Boyfriends is just that it's like 5 stereotypical gay characters are together in a room or whatever, they're doing stupid stuff. That's the entire gimmick of it. I personally hate it. Everyone else, basically everyone that I've watched who reviewed it hated it. But the thing is that those very surface level characters and tropes, they just sucked in all the all the teenage girls, I guess, to read this retarded little webcomic or whatever, and that worked well in its favor. So in that way, deep characters aren't always needed for a specific story. That's why I say story gimmicks can pull in more people than deep and well thought out characters. So 4, we don't need great characters for great stories. Other aspects could make up majorly for their lacking characters. I think whenever I think of this, I think of something like Dragon Ball Z, because people don't think of Dragon Ball Z for the deep and complex characters. Even though Dragon Ball has some great characters. They think of Dragon Ball for the awesome fighting, they think of it for the cool world building, and they think of it for all the different memorable, sick villains. And also the transformations, because those were freaking cool. Similar thing with Baki. We don't think of Baki for the extremely deep characters or anything like that. We think of it for the very absurd narrations and monologues and long explanations of what's going on. We're in there for the fights, not necessarily the characters. What are the characters gonna have to fight next? What crazy thing is the author gonna make them fight next? Once they have to fight a Neanderthal named Pickle, who they just unfroze for some reason, and then they have to fight this guy. They had to fight a reincarnated version of Musashi. Like, it's just crazy stuff over and over. And then there's another arc after that I didn't even read yet that I still want to, where they have to fight like this sumo wrestler guy or something, and he's like stronger than Baki or something, or he can fight like Yujiro. I don't know, but it's some crazy stuff that happens in Baki. We don't think of the legitimate the character backstories really a lot when we watch something like that, because the other aspects of the story majorly makes up for the lacking characters of the story itself. Similar thing can be true with like world building, I would say. You guys might flame me in the comments or something for this, I don't know, but whenever I think of something with fire world building and lacking characters, it's Five Nights at Freddy's. Think about it. The characters are basically non-existent. The only characters that are given characters are usually in fan stuff. Like, we don't know anything about how Henry talks in the games. I guess there are the books, but I haven't read those. But we don't know anything about how Henry talks. We don't know anything about how William talks. Everything's very basic in the actual thing, but given the world building of Five Nights at Freddy's, that's what makes it very interesting and keeps people in. 5. Other characters, like their gimmicks, can make up for it. So like I was saying earlier with the Boyfriends webcomic, the gimmick of Boyfriends is that it's just a stupid little romance webcomic, I guess, for teenage girls. And the thing is, the gimmick of that is that they'll just eat anything up. They'll eat anything like that up. They eat that fish paste right up. And guess what? It worked, because that's the gimmick of the story. A very, 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 very similar thing is true for all those weird harem animes, or those isekai animes, where none of the characters, you'll remember any of the names afterwards. But the whole gimmick is that you're the isekai guy. You get to go to the other world, and you get to have 10 wives, and they're all really hot, and you get tons of kids afterwards. That's a whole fantasy, right? All these animes are copy paste, but they have a market. Even though these animes have terrible characters and they suck a lot, they're still highly successful. So number 6 will be miscellaneous points, but I don't think I really have any. I think I've touched on basically every single base. So is it fun for stories to have bad characters? Here's the second half of the video. No. So 1, stories should strive to be as good as possible, and characters are a massive part of if the story is overall good or bad. So my thinking here is that you're with the characters for a lot of the story, right? And I think I said this a little earlier, but you're with the characters for a lot of the entire story. If the characters are bad, then you're not going to want to watch the rest of the story, or read the rest of the story, or whatever it may be, you know, listen to the rest of the story, anything like that, because they're going to be like, this character's an idiot, or this character is annoying, or this character's pissing me off, or this character's a terrible person. Those things can easily make it so you don't want to, you know, watch a story, listen to a story, or whatever, even if its world is extremely interesting or unique or anything like that, because the characters are how you're going to be introduced to this world through their lens. So in that way, no, it's not fine for stories to have bad characters. So 2, characters should at least be memorable so you can see and recognize who they are. It's important for us to be able to look at a character and know exactly what their name is. Imagine, for example, if Rick was so immemorable that every time you looked at Rick from Rick and Morty, you're like, what's that guy's name again? Like you gotta be reminded of him 1,000 times. And this sort of thing can also be true for if a character is like some kind of stereotype. Like, for example, I've already talked about isekai, the isekai protagonist, the guy with the black hair, a basic name, whatever. He acts very basic. He acts like how you probably would act in a given situation. And generally, those guys have the exact same personalities, right? Those are bad characters, and they're not memorable due to that very fact. Or if a character is big and stupid or something like that, and they act like every big and stupid character from, I don't know, every other fantasy book or comic or movie that you've already watched, you're probably not going to be able to remember that guy, right? And that can really damage a story later on, because it's like, if you can't even remember the character's name, it's like, why would you, how do you even care about what's going to happen to them later on in this story? 3, their personality should be unique. Here's the thing about writing a story. The fact is that whatever you're thinking of, someone has most likely already done it in some kind of way, and someone has most likely thought kind of similarly of a character that you're trying to make. So them having unique personality, especially within the context of your story, is extremely, extremely important for their memorability, how much we care about them, etc. And also, people just memorize unique characters way more easily. Like, I could easily give you a list right now of very memorable characters that I remember from some of my favorite pieces of media. So first one would probably be Sans from Undertale, Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z, this is random, but Zack from NES Godzilla, easily, NES Godzilla creepypasta, very, very easily. I'd say Frankenstein's monster. He's probably one of my favorite characters in any pieces of media. Honestly, there's never been a character like him since. Probably Ren from Ren and Stimpy. I've literally never seen a character like Ren ever again. Ren is freaking crazy, dude. Harry from Resident Alien. Man, when will season 4 come out? Holy crap. And now I'm gonna give an actual real curveball. Striker's first appearance in Hell of a Boss was just phenomenal. Probably ZK from Analog and D-Pad. That's a real random card, but I really like ZK from Analog and D-Pad. You know, I could just keep going on, and this is just to show how important it is to have unique characters whenever you make a comic, whenever you make anything. You know, I just pulled from all kinds of random different sources: comics, cartoons, a freaking creepypasta. You know, these are all great characters. And the thing is that a great character completely transcends any form of media. If you describe a great character, I'm gonna remember him. If you show me a great character, I'm gonna remember him. If you act out a great character, I'm gonna remember him, and that's really, really important. 5, the longevity and legacy of a story. Here's the thing: stuff like boyfriends, for example, that kind of stuff will be forgotten in a long time. As soon as that thing goes off hiatus, as soon as the YouTubers are done talking about it, nobody is gonna remember Boyfriends, the webcomic. Because the thing is that the whole thing was a gimmick. People don't really remember gimmicks. Whenever something is just completely derived off of like a gimmick and not timeless characters or an interesting story that's just great, then again, it's gonna be forgotten. That's why something like the Eltingville comics or have like still a small community of people, because those comics, even though it never got that popular or big, they had such interesting characters, they had such an interesting, unique idea that people are still enjoying the story to this very day. The same is also true for massively popular characters that everybody knows and has known for the past 100 years, like, I don't know, Superman or Batman and stuff like that. People know these characters because of the fact that what they were was unique and interesting, and it brought a lot of different change. And it wasn't just like some stupid gimmick of the time and then they faded into obscurity. No, these are different characters with great backstories and stories that can resonate with anyone at any point in time. And so having great characters with great personalities, backstories, and all of that stuff is super important for the longevity of your story, so that people can actually remember it and look back on it and not cringe and be like, wow, these characters, they kind of sucked. Let's never look at this again, you know, stuff like that. And that's also why a lot of people replay old games like Undertale again. I already named Sans as a great character, but every character in Undertale is just incredible, and that's why people still like Undertale to this very day. That's why people are making all these AUs of Sans still, because Sans was such a great character that it's like, holy crap, I want to make alternate versions of Sans, and people are doing it still right now, a decade later. And that really does show how great characters can be whenever people, the writers, take the serious time to actually make them great. So yeah, that was a really long one. That was all 0.5. So 0.6, we need to understand why they're the way that they are. Bad characters tend to also have no backstory, or we don't really understand why they act the way that they are a lot of the time. Like, for example, I'd say that someone like Moxie, no, I'd say Millie is a pretty bad character from A Hell of a Boss. We don't exactly understand why she's the way that she is, because we never get any backstory on who she is. She doesn't really go through any character arcs unlike the other characters, and she's not fleshed out at all in terms of backstory. We just understand that she's from a basic household, and they really could have went into that, where Millie had like a nice family growing up, so she clashes a lot with some of the other characters like Blitzo or Luna, because they're from families that are very dysfunctional and bad. Like Blitzo's dad literally sold him off for a few pennies or whatever to Stolas' dad, and Luna was a stray until she was like 17 or something like that, until Blitzo decided to adopt her. So that's the thing, they could have really done a lot with that, given Millie's backstory, and she could have acted different in that sort of way. They could have had very interesting sort of things. So that was very missed potential in that sort of way, and we never get to understand why they're the way that they are. I think that a good character acts in a certain way, and you understand enough about them and their backstory and who they are as a character, if that's necessary, of course, to where you understand why they're acting in the way that they're acting. In like a non-serialized cartoon or something that's very silly for kids or whatever, it's okay to not have like a crazy backstory for a character. But for someone like Guts, if we just, I don't know, started off in like the arc where he's going around and killing the priests and stuff like that, or right after the Golden Age, right after he escaped the eclipse, the story wouldn't be as good because we didn't get all the Golden Age, you know what I mean? And Rick also wouldn't be as good of a character in Rick and Morty if we never understood why exactly he's the way he is. And throughout the entire series, even though it's a silly, funny show, for the most part, it does have a lot of deep moments that give us understanding as to who the characters actually are, what they're doing, and all that kind of stuff, for us to be able to take seriously the characters, even though a lot of them are big jerks. If we're unable to understand why the character is acting in the certain way that they're acting, if that's never ever established, then that's kind of like another barrier set between us and the character. It's like they're just acting this way, we don't understand why. It's like meeting a stranger and never actually getting closer to them, because whenever you meet strangers and you get closer to them and they become your acquaintances or friends, you start to understand why exactly they're the way that they are, because they tell you a little bit about their life, they tell you about their experiences and stuff like that, and the story should be doing basically the same subtly over the course of the story at the very least, or a backstory if the story calls for it. So 7, any miscellaneous points. So no, it's not fine for stories to have bad characters, because it completely undermines the possibility of the story to be memorable, great, and timeless. Like, for example, even something like Ren and Stimpy is completely timeless and great because of the not interesting, but really funny timeless characters of the simplistic timeless characters of Ren and Stimpy, and the fact that they basically started hilarious gags that all kinds of cartoons still use to this very day. Like the really close up, the creepy close-ups that are super detailed. I really like doing that for my comics. Like that's how funny I think it is. I take inspiration from Ren and Stimpy to do that kind of thing because that's such a hilarious bit. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, something like Berserk. People still go back and read Berserk for the great characters of the Golden Arc. People still want to read Berserk for Guts. And that's because he's such a great and timeless character. So Berserk is still infinitely going to be read now, and 10 years later it's still going to be read, 20 years later it's still going to be read. People going back and watching Ren and Stimpy, it'll be a classic cartoon 10 years into the future, 20 years into the future, 30 years into the future, because of what it is. Same as like Chowder, same as like SpongeBob. Or if we're talking about comics, same is true for something like Scott Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim is just a great and timeless story. It's nice and short, it's got interesting characters, and it's got a pretty relatable arc for a lot of people these days. It's just a great story with great and realistic characters, and they're great not because they're ultra complex or something like that. They just feel like normal people, regular people. They aren't Berserk level or anything like that. It's just the fact that they feel so real. Scott Pilgrim is an example of a perfect story that will never ever die because of its great characters and arcs and everything like that. So no, it's not okay to have bad characters in stories, even if other aspects will make up for it, because what we leave a story with is a memory of who was in the story and what the world was like. That's generally what we remember, but mostly we remember who was in the world and not what the world was like. We don't really whenever we think of Batman, we're not really thinking of like a specific kind of Batman. We're thinking of just the character Batman, right? Whenever we think of Superman, we aren't thinking of a specific Superman. We're thinking of Superman. We're not thinking of like Superman from Golden Age comics or something like that. And the exact same is true for stories that don't have massive universes or multiverses. Whenever we think of someone like Ramona from Scott Pilgrim, we're not thinking about the entirety of Scott Pilgrim, we're just thinking about Ramona and who she is. Whenever we think of like, this is another really random pull, but Digimon had some really good characters. But whenever we think of someone like Matt from Digimon, we're not thinking of like the entire digital world accompanied with it. We're thinking of just Matt and maybe his character arc. And all of that is okay because it serves to make the story that they come from far more memorable, and one that you may want to revisit or get more parts of, or you know, stuff like that. Final verdict? Shockingly, no. I would say that no, you don't have to have great characters to have a good story, or not a good story, but a successful story. And I look at something like Boyfriends for an example of that. Boyfriends has horrible characters, but if you're just going for success, you don't really need the greatest characters in the entire world. Now, I would say yes if you want a story that's actually memorable, that stays in people's minds, but if you're just going for something that's like a surface level enjoyment or gimmicky or something like that, you really don't have to think of really complex characters. All you really have to do is just wing it, basically, or think of very basic things and stuff like that. For what your characters can be, like stereotypes, for example. Your characters can just be blank stereotypes, and that's completely fine. So yeah, it's really late. Hope you enjoyed this video. I gotta go to sleep right now. I feel so tired. Hope that you subscribe. Enjoy the rest of my videos. I just upload whenever I want. So yeah, bye guys.